Hi guys, so it's a new week. Now, one lucky impoverished African country just discovered that they've been sitting on massive 30 billion barrels of crude oil. As expected, the citizens of this country received this good news with a ray of hope. Why? Because definitely they are going to be rich. But there is some mixed reactions. Why? Neighboring countries claim that country as their own, or rather they claim the territory where that country sits on to be their own territory. Now, keep it rocked as I tell you the story about the new discovery. Latest oil exploration has confirmed without doubt that Somaliland, now take note, I'm not referring to Somalia. Somaliland has an estimated 30 billion barrels of crude oil in their offshore fields, their offshore oil fields. So the background story to this discovery is that back in 2020, there was this Norwegian seismic survey company called TGS that came to the coast or off the coast of Somaliland. Of course, they were given permission to do that and carried out what they call seismic survey. And to those who do not know what this seismic survey means, is that they reflect sound waves on the ocean floor using some equipment, and then this sound wave creates what they call the CAT scan or the CAT scan, and from there you can tell the Earth's subsurface properties. In other words, it's a way of basically detecting minerals like crude oil and gas. And now this company went back to their country and studied those diagrams, and today they have come back with a report which says that they are convinced from those diagrams there could be offshore reserves of about 30 billion barrels. In other words, Somaliland, or off the coast of Somaliland, they have discovered an oil field with more than 30 billion barrels of crude oil. And what that means is that Somaliland now becomes the 18th country in the world when it comes to the size of proven oil reserve. In other words, it's at the same level with Kazakhstan. And to those who do not know Kazakhstan, can you go and the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, why has it taken so long to make an oil find either in Somalia or Somaliland? And now for Somalia, I do not know, but Somaliland, this particular discovery is being billed as the first discovery in Somaliland, but in fact there have been several instances of oil seepage. And for those who do not know what an oil seepage is that oil seeps either into the ocean or comes to the surface of the land as a result of maybe human activity like mining. And when people spot the oil coming either to the surface, they now conclude there could be a lot of oil below that surface. And in most cases, or in such cases, it may not be commercial. And commercial means that it has to be in large quantities for the governments and companies to invest billions of drilling equipment. It has to be thousands of liters, because imagine if you install a drilling equipment worth millions only to find that it was a small borehole with few liters of crude oil. So that is a loss. So commercial, you have to be sure how much we are talking about. And for this one that came out of this seismic finding or survey, we are talking about 30 billion barrels of crude oil in offshore oil fields. Now let's differentiate between Somalia and Somaliland. The difference between Somalia and Somaliland. And from history, most of you may recall that Somali region was colonized by different powers. And from the north, where we have Djibouti, that region was colonized by the French. The middle section, where we have Somaliland, which is this country we are talking about, was colonized by the British. And the south region, or the south section, which is the Somali that most people know, the one in Mogadishu, the one that has a blue flag with a white star in the middle, that one was colonized by the Italians. And then we had the Second World War, and Britain and Italy were fighting from the opposite sides. And Britain, or the British, kicked out the Italians from Somalia. And from that day, the British held Somalia as their protectorate. And come 1960, the British gave Somaliland their independence. And the same year, they gave Somalia their independence. So these two countries, newly independent countries, decided to come together by ratifying their constitutions to form one greater Somalia. And they were later to include Djibouti. So Djibouti was in their plan for a greater Somalia. And then in between, there was a war between them, now this greater Somalia, with Ethiopia, which they lost. And after that, there was a civil war between Somaliland, the capital Hargeisa, with Mogadishu in Somalia. Why? Because the president of Somalia, or the president of the greater Somalia, was accusing the leaders of the northern Somalia, in this case Somaliland, of plotting against him because he thought they saw him as weak after losing the war in Ethiopia. So he bombed Hargeisa. He razed that city to the ground. And it was bitterness from the Somalilanders that saw him removed in 1993, because the civil war continued for more years, And in 1993, once Siad Barre, the president of Somalia, was kicked out of power and he escaped to exile, and the government in Mogadishu fell, Somaliland declared independence. So they reverted back to what they were in 1960. And most countries to this day do not recognize them as independent, including the UN and the African Union. Even though Somaliland acts like an independent country, they have their own president, they hold elections, they have their own parliament, they have their own constitution, they have their own central bank, they have their own currency, they have their own national anthem, national flag, their own army, they have their own navy. Basically, they are a country, but they are not internationally recognized. And today, they have discovered 30 billion crude oil, basically 30 billion barrels of crude oil. And the government in Mogadishu, now the other Somalia, is insisting that that oil belongs to them. And any company that wants to drill that oil needs to go to Mogadishu and negotiate with them, because that oil does not belong to Somaliland. It belongs to the whole Somalia, the whole greater Somalia. So you understand, these guys just discovered oil, and there's someone who is claiming that oil.